The 80s produced a specific kind of film that nobody in Hollywood knew how to handle. And the directors who made them pushed so far past what the industry considered acceptable that the fallout followed everyone involved for the rest of the decade. Every single one of them paid for it immediately. Ratings battles lost. Careers derailed. Films pulled from theaters before most audiences ever had a chance to see them. Paradise, 1982. Paradise is the film where a 17-year-old Phoebe Cates finished shooting in the Israeli desert, returned home, believing she had negotiated exactly which scenes would show what, and then watched the finished cut to discover the producers had hired body doubles to film explicit close-ups without ever telling her. The story follows two teenagers who survive a brutal caravan massacre in the Victorian Middle East. They flee into the wilderness with nothing and eventually find a hidden oasis where their friendship becomes something neither of them expected. What the producers were actually building was a $3.5 million attempt to out-exploit Blue Lagoon, filmed outside American jurisdiction, specifically to avoid the legal questions that would have shut the production down before it started. Cates refused to promote the film, spent years describing the experience as a professional betrayal, and pivoted so aggressively toward comedy that most people who know her from Fast Times at Ridgemont High have no idea this film exists. Star 80, 1983, where Star 80 opens with a director who insisted on filming the murder scene in the actual house where the real killing happened. 3 years after the blood had dried on those same floorboards, because he believed the location would do something to his actors that no stage set ever could. It centers on Paul Snider, a small-time hustler who manipulates a naive young woman named Dorothy Stratton into nude modeling, engineers her rise to Playboy Playmate of the Year, and then watches Hollywood absorb everything he built her into, while slowly cutting him out entirely. Eric Roberts stayed in character as the volatile Snider so completely that the crew stopped separating the actor from the role. The Academy steered clear of him despite near-universal critical praise, and the industry spent the next several years treating him like the man he had only been playing. Dressed to Kill, 1980. Dressed to Kill arrived in theaters in the summer of 1980 with an X rating, a commercial death sentence. Newspapers wouldn't run the ads, which forced Brian De Palma to make frame-accurate cuts to the opening shower sequence and the elevator murder just to get the film in front of an audience. A frustrated suburban housewife, a razor-wielding blonde in an elevator, a street-smart call girl left as the only witness, and a teenage boy forced to hunt the real killer alongside her. When it became public that De Palma had used a 19-year-old body double for his 48-year-old lead, it ignited a conversation about what Hollywood was actually asking aging actresses to compete with. Feminist groups picketed theaters nationally. The backlash became a national news story, and simultaneously drove audiences into seats to see what the fuss was about. Crimes of Passion, 1984. Crimes of Passion nearly bankrupted its production company. Too graphic for theaters, too explicit for distributors, a problem with no clean solution and no one willing to take responsibility for creating it. Kathleen Turner plays a fashion designer who spends her nights as a high-end prostitute named China Blue, hunted by a suburban husband obsessed with her freedom, and a deranged street preacher carrying a weapon he believes God instructed him to use on her. Turner took the role specifically because it required her to dismantle everything that had made her famous. Anthony Perkins improvised his most unhinged lines mid-scene and delivered a performance so grotesquely committed the crew quietly avoided him between setups. Director Ken Russell's unrated cut was hacked by 12 minutes for theaters. He released the full version on home video, where it became a massive underground hit in 1985. Blue Velvet, 1986. Blue Velvet arrived at Universal as a script so disturbing the studio passed on it twice. And what Lynch delivered was something the industry had no existing category for. A clean-cut college student discovers a severed human ear lying in a field, a detail that pulls him into a violent sexual underworld operating just beneath the surface of ordinary American life. Dennis Hopper called Lynch personally to say he had to play Frank Booth, because he was Frank. The cast and crew stopped treating that as a joke by the third week of production. Isabella Rossellini was dropped by her modeling agency for taking the role. Lynch refused to cut a single frame. and still received an Academy Award nomination for Best Director, a recognition that left the industry visibly uncomfortable, as if the institution had accidentally endorsed something it hadn't fully understood. Last Exit to Brooklyn. 1989. Last Exit to Brooklyn spent 25 years being passed around Hollywood as unfilmable. It survived an obscenity trial in the UK, watched director after director walk away, before European financing finally got it made. Jennifer Jason Leigh spent months living in the grittier parts of Brooklyn and insisted on performing as much of the assault sequence as possible herself, and the sequence caused walkouts at every major festival screening. Award bodies ignored her on the grounds that the material was simply unwatchable, which is a different thing from saying the work wasn't there. In 1990, the New York Film Critics Circle and the Boston Society of Film Critics both named her Best Supporting Actress, a rare double win. That forced the entire industry to reckon with what it had chosen to look away from. River's Edge. 1986. River's Edge was based on a real 1981 murder. A 16-year-old strangled his girlfriend, invited at least 10 classmates to view her body over 2 days, and not one of them called the police. The film centers on teenagers who treat the body on the riverbank as a social complication rather than a tragedy. Crispin Glover arrived on set with an interpretation so eccentric it terrified the director into discussions about firing him. Keanu Reeves and the cast defended him, arguing his manic energy made their own apathy look more convincing by contrast. Dennis Hopper fueled his performance on personal experience with addiction, and made the young cast genuinely uneasy around a prop gun in ways the production had no infrastructure to manage. Glover walked away with a reputation for being difficult that followed him all the way to his falling out with the producers of Back to the Future. Bolero, 1984. Canon Films spent $7 million on Bolero, watched the ratings board hand it an X, and released it unrated, hoping notoriety would do what advertising could not. Bo Derek's own husband directed every one of her nude scenes. He convinced Canon the project was sophisticated erotic art, and watched critics call it a vanity project so hollow it turned a global icon into box office poison overnight. The film returned only $8.9 million against the $7 million spent. Swept the Razzie Awards, Worst Picture, Worst Actress, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, in a single night, and major studios quietly removed Bo Derek from consideration for any future mainstream production. Angel Heart, 1987. Angel Heart arrived with an X rating and a blood-soaked sex scene between Mickey Rourke and a 19-year-old actress, still appearing every week as America's sweetheart on one of the most-watched shows on television. A private investigator, a missing singer, a trail through the voodoo underground of New Orleans, and a revelation about his own identity withheld until the very last possible moment. Robert De Niro grew his hair and fingernails to inhuman lengths, refused all small talk with Rourke between takes, and created a sense of dread that Rourke later admitted made him avoid De Niro whenever cameras weren't rolling. Lisa Bonet's appearance got her sidelined on the show that made her famous, and ended a mainstream career trajectory she never fully recovered from. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer was produced for $110,000 by investors who wanted a standard slasher movie. What they got instead sat on a shelf for 3 years, because the ratings board refused to give it anything other than an X, based not on any specific scene, but on its overall tone. While Michael Rooker spent the entire 28-day shoot in complete isolation, sitting alone in dark corners between takes, leaving the actress opposite him so genuinely unsettled that her fear required no performance at all. The home invasion sequence was so realistic that local authorities questioned whether the production had used actual crime footage. The film released unrated as a badge of honor, and permanently changed how horror used found footage by removing every trace of fun from the format. Bad Lieutenant, 1992. Bad Lieutenant is the film Harvey Keitel personally pushed into production. He convinced the director to let him build the character with no barriers between the performance and the audience, and delivered something so uncomfortably human, the ratings board had no framework for what to do with it. She, an unnamed New York cop, completely destroyed by drugs, alcohol, and gambling debts long past the point of recovery. Investigating the rape of a nun whose silence forces him toward a confrontation with whatever is left of his conscience. Abel Ferrara shot it in 17 days on real New York streets. The ratings board handed it an NC-17. Mainstream theater chains refused to book it. Critics split violently. Keitel received no award nominations. The film disappeared from theaters in weeks and spent the next decade being quietly reassessed by everyone who had initially looked away.